Alright, all greetings and welcome to the next episode for Civilization 4 Colonization. I figured before I basically start this episode, I might talk a little bit about Civilization 4 and, this might be a little bit more like a half episode type of thing, but whatever, let's just get into it. So, I'll note that Civilization 4 was basically a remake of the original game from 1994. And at the time, the original game was a game about managing units, to manage professions for them, gather resources, produce goods to sell back to Europe, make money, build an army, build up your settlements, and eventually when you have the chance, you separate, or you're not separate, but rather declare independence from the mother country, and then they send an army to try and crush you, and you defeat the army that they try and send, and then, you're independent, you win the game. And that's basically what the game is all about. A lot of people like to criticize Civilization 4, though, because, well, there's a lot of things that, they didn't do that was, correspond to the time period. And for the most part, a lot of it's, criticism is, kind of valid and such like that, but whatever. One thing to note, by the way, is that if you go to, the manual for colonization, you actually see a little bit about, some thought they might have for, say, Portugal, for example. Basically, the colonial powers, the four powers available to play in colonization are the ones that had the greatest and longest lasting influence on the New World: England, France, Holland, and Spain. If we had to include a fifth nation, we'd probably include Portugal. Although Portugal's influence was larger than the Netherlands, Portugal fell under Spanish rule for much of the time, covered by the game, and its policies and circumstances were very similar to Spain. So, basically, something I know about this game is that there's been a lot of criticism beyond, only having, the four powers that are basically included, and not Portugal. And it's one of those things that, I think they probably could have improved a lot more. Something else to note is that, it doesn't have, any, aspects of, the slavery that was basically, corresponding to the period. Portugal, for those who don't know, basically went down the African coast and they basically, started to get, African slaves and capital and stuff like that. And they basically shipped a lot of those slaves over to, the New World. The Spanish soon did the same, and then eventually England also did the same a lot later, but it's much later in the time period. But anyhow, let's just start playing a game and we'll go from there. Okay. Alright, let's see here. Now, I'll note at this point that I haven't really talked about this game and some of the aspects to it. I'll note that this is basically a remake of the game where each the settlement basically has its 9 square radius around the city center, including the city center. And basically the natives in the game work like they did in the original game. But at the same time, I kind of feel this is sort of a lacking game in some ways. One thing that they could have done, I think, for this game was they could have made it so the Incans and the Aztecs stood out a little bit more compared to the other native tribes. Basically, in the older game, the Aztecs and the Incans at least have distinct looking city icons for them, and they also have a little bit more of a city radius to them as well. Basically, they have the sort of Civ 2 type of city radius where 2 squares out from the city center, the city basically has city influence and such. And if you try and build anything or all that stuff inside it, the natives don't like it too much. But that's not a thing. That's basically a thing in this game. They actually made it so the Incans and the Aztecs are kind of just like the other native civs. And on top of that, they didn't make the other native civs any distinct from each other as well, because you have the Iroquois. The Iroquois were basically an agrarian society back then. They essentially were how can I put this? The Iroquois basically were had farming communities and stuff like that. They actually were able to do some partial livestock, not livestock, but farming techniques and agriculture. They farm corn and stuff like that, and that's something that essentially it's not really being shown really too much in this game. And this is something I know about this game. There is a lot of things that they could do to improve it. If I was to redesign this game myself, I'd probably make it so each of the natives and Indians were a little bit more distinct from each other. I'd probably change it so the Aztecs here, for example, and the Incans, they'd probably be a little bit more Civilization-like. basically, if you know a little bit about like the Incans and the Aztecs basically had like an actual empire back in the day, and so did the Incans as well. Basically, I keep saying basically, but the Incans were like were able to like build like monuments like the Machu Picchu, which is basically it's a world wonder at this point in South America that they built on a mountain, and it took a long time for like the world to find. They had like road working and stuff like that. They had like advanced battle tactics. Like they actually had like armies kind of like the old pre Bronze Age type of things that happened like in Europe, and like they could have like better represented that for like the Incan Empire a little bit more. The Aztecs, of course, they were also empire builders. They subjugated a lot of like the native tribes around them, and for the most part, they they had good like aqueduct type of ideas, I guess. The size of like the Aztec cities was actually pretty much on par with like the European ones at the time when the Spanish came to them, and the Aztecs were very good about cleaning themselves and good hygiene and stuff like that. They're actually more hygienic than like the Europeans, so that's not exactly hard to understand since the Europeans are kind of behind that area for a long while. Something else to know about the natives, by the way, is that when guns were like introduced to America, the first thing that natives usually did when they got guns was basically kill a bunch of other natives. People like to depict like the Europeans basically like butchering the natives in the New World, but it's not really just the Europeans that butchered the the natives in the New World. A lot of things butchered the natives in the New World. Basically, whenever the Europeans gave like a native tribe like guns, that tribe would usually go and kill their enemies, which are usually other natives. And they essentially like send like a bunch of warriors over, kill or displace like a bunch of other natives, and this happened a lot. And eventually it happened that like a lot of natives basically like migrated to like the west. Like the Sioux, for example, they used to be around like the Mississippi area, but they actually migrated a lot like farther out west, up to like Dakota, and I'm not sure where it is in Canada at this point, but somewhere over there in the prairies. And essentially, this is something that they could like better like shown. They actually could have had the natives actually fight each other. Something I actually kind of like would have like to see included, for example, would be like the Incan Empire being at civil war. For those who don't know, when the like Spanish basically invaded like the Americans or the South America continent, they actually found the Incans in a state of like civil war, and there's like two sides warring against each other. When the Spanish basically came in, they basically slaughtered everyone with their advanced battle tactics and like stuff like that. But for the most part, the natives in this game just don't fight each other, and it's kind of sucky in that way. Now, something else to note, by the way, about the Native Americans and the Spanish and all that. Basically, in this game, they have it so like units basically for military units basically consists of like a few things. They have like the natives, the armed braves, and then they have like the militia for like the colonial powers. But for a lot of like the time in like Europe during like the early part of the centuries following 1492. A lot of like guns and stuff like that weren't actually brought over to the Americas. They actually more relied on like traditional swords and armor and stuff like that in the initial conquistador phase of like colonization of the Americas. The Spain, for example, they used to like they basically had like advanced armor, so they had like steel armor and steel breastplates and stuff like that. And their advanced battle tactics, because they had very good battle tactics, actually allowed them to like pulverize the natives when they basically came. It wasn't guns that actually allowed like the Spanish to overcome the natives, but rather it's like the fact that like they had like well, here's something to note about like the Spanish. Basically, they've been fighting like the Arabs in like lower parts of Spain for like several centuries. Like there's something called the Reconquistadista, which basically was all about like the Inquisition of Muslims in Spain to drive them back out into Africa. And they more or less just finished that. And when they were coming over to like the Americas, they had like all these soldiers to like throw at like the natives, and that's why they basically had all these adventurers like going to like Mexico and into like the South America to basically like conquer them and colonize them and stuff like that. And for the most part, that's basically how like Spain basically reacted early on. And if I was like to design this game, I'd probably like make it so like there'd be phases in this game where kind of like in like the original Civilization, you would have like different like ages of like the Iron Age, Classical Age, Renaissance Age, Industrial Age, stuff like that. I'd probably have like in the Age of Discovery like Conquistador phase where like you have like no guns basically being brought over. You basically just have the advanced military units. After a while, I'd probably have like more like an exploration phase where well, I suppose exploration would be like tied into the conqueror phase, but for the most part, the first phase would basically be like a phase where like they don't have guns, but they have like their advanced military tactics that they can bring over. Eventually, after that, I have like a gunpowder age where they start bringing over muskets because I'll note that like the early gunpowder weapons, like the arquebusiers or whatever they're called, they weren't that reliable. But when I eventually got around to muskets, those were a little bit more reliable in battle, and the natives, for example, made really good use of them. And basically, what happened with like gun development in the New World, you basically had like no guns introduced by the Europeans. Then they actually started bringing over guns, which are like muskets. And by the time like the American Revolution rolled around, they actually had like snipers being like introduced as well. And I'll note, by the way, that's actually part of the reason why like the Americans won their war. They had like snipers, and they actually would commonly snipe off like the British officers, and that would like cause like the British to be thrown into disarray and stuff like that. It wasn't like they were outclassed to like the Americans, but they did have like a couple of their like special traits that they could make use of. Now I will note, by the way, that in a way I kind of like the the sort of like promotion system in this game. And for those who basically don't remember that, your units basically have promotions for them. So this guy, for example, he has promotions for like what was it? I can't remember, but these guys have promotions basically, and like they got like advanced like powers, and if I want to, I can like make it so like they have like bonuses in the woodlands and like the mountains and stuff like that. In the original game, like they made it so like your soldiers would have a bonus in like those sort of terrain automatically, but in this game you actually have to like train them up to basically get those bonuses. I kind of like this idea because like it actually improves your. Here's how it basically works. Unless you actually use your soldiers in combat to actually make use of the terrain, they're not going to get the benefits of the terrain. They're just going to be like standard units, and they're not going to be any like better or worse for like defending or suppressing the mother forces when they basically come to like stop you from declaring independence. So it's actually kind of an interesting thing, the promotion system, in that it's sort of not realistic to like the fact that your units would probably have some idea of like how to fight and like to train, but at the same time, unless you actually use the combat experience to actually build them up, you probably wouldn't have had that experience anyways, because you wouldn't know how to do combat. Though, it's one of those things that could be improved, I guess. Basically, I'd probably make it so when like the American country arrives, I'd probably give them some sort of promotion to make them better at ambushing the mother country, but whatever. And I'm almost going to take a drink of water because I'm losing my voice a little bit here. Now, another something, by the way, is that something else I probably do, like, in the game, your units can like build improvements on the terrain, like, roads and farms and stuff like that. But I would have imagined that during this time period, like the Aztecs and Incans, and to some extent like the Iroquois and the other agrarian native societies would probably be able to like build their own improvements too. If I was to make this game, I'd probably make this so it actually act like more like civilizations, where the Incans would at least be building the roads that like would build between their settlements. The Iroquois would probably be able to build farms to like better improve the soil and stuff like that. A note, by the way, that if you look at the original game, you see stuff like some tribes were like nomadic and other tribes are semi-nomadic and others were agrarian and stuff like that. I'm not sure if you guys know about it, but there's a game that I basically helped kickstart that's still in development, but I'm very interested to basically see when it comes out. It's called At the Gates, and in that game, they're going to have it so like, the barbarian societies that you're going to be playing in that game, because you're going to be playing barbarians in that game. They're actually like mobile in that their settlements aren't fixed to like a location. They actually pack up and move around. And that'd be something that could be very interesting for this type of game, where the native societies could probably pack up and move their stuff around. So as like, European powers encroach on them, the natives might move a little bit more to like the west or away from the European powers to basically escape like that encroachment. And so that'd be like an interesting thing that the natives could do. There's a lot of ways this game could be improved, and I hope that like if there is like another remake of this game, to actually start improving it a little bit. And you know what? Just to say about as well a little bit more of Portugal. It would be nice to see that Portugal was included, but I'll note that there's actually other European powers that'd be like really interesting as well. While like they say like English, the French, the Spanish, and the Netherlands, they all had like the greatest influence on the quote-unquote Americas. If you don't include Portugal, who had like better one than Netherlands, there was like other powers that actually tried to like make colonies. two of those that really stand out to me are Scotland and Sweden. And for those who don't know, Sweden basically had a colony around the Delaware River, where I think it's like New Jersey and that area basically around there, New Jersey and a couple of like areas around there, Philadelphia and such. They basically had like a place called New Sweden. Essentially, when the Dutch were basically colonizing, they pissed off Peter Minot, and for those who know, he's basically a character in this game. Peter Minot basically went over to like the Swedish, I think, because he was basically offered to start a colony for New Sweden. And he basically went into New Netherlands territories where the Dutch really couldn't do anything, and they basically established New Sweden as a colony. And what basically happened, he started developing a colony there for New Sweden. So Sweden was actually in the Americas. Another country to think about would be like Scotland, and Scotland was actually a really big player in like the colonization era during this like time period. For those who don't know, Scotland actually screwed up so badly in the Caribbean, they actually lost their country for the most part due to just going bankrupt as a result of it. They initially tried to sell Nova Scotia, and for those who don't know, Nova Scotia basically means New Scotland, and it's basically like the province I live in. And after that, they also tried to start again with a small settlement in the Panama area called Darien. And the Darien scheme was basically like this sort of Panama Canal from back in the day, where the Scots would be like this sort of middleman that would ship goods from the Pacific over to the Atlantic through that little gap there. And it failed, and they screwed up so badly when they failed that way that their country basically went bankrupt. And well, England, as you probably know, absorbed them for the most part, and that's basically how the United Kingdom basically came to be formed, is because Scotland screwed up so bad they had to join England. And it's all resolved their failed Caribbean project for the most part. Anyhow, for the most part, I've been talking quite a bit. Let's actually start playing the game. So, or actually, you know what? I've actually gone about 20 minutes talking, so maybe we'll make this a half episode, because that's basically what it's going to be all about for the most part. Just talking to let you guys know about thoughts about the game, and I actually would like to see another type of game like this. A lot of people like to complain that about the games that are made in this time period, but there's actually a lot to like about these games, because they actually tell you a little bit of the history, and even though they're not entirely subjectively true to it, sometimes this game doesn't have anything about slavery, where the black slaves basically were for those who don't know, by the way, if you talk about England, they actually initially didn't use black slaves because they found them too expensive. Portugal was basically dominating that market, and for the most part, what England tried to do is they try to make use of indentured servants and Indian slaves to man their productive farms and stuff for cash crops. After a while, when their indentured servants were basically finding better work in Britain, and the Indians were all dead, they started using African slaves. But at that time also, the African slaves that they basically purchased were starting to come down in price, and it's actually becoming more of a profitable venture to actually bring them over. Just to tell you a little bit about the British. Anyhow, yeah, I've basically gone on enough for this episode. It's basically a half episode to basically tell you a little bit about the game and my thoughts like that. Hope you guys basically enjoyed this playthrough, and if you actually know about any other type of colonization game like this, let me know. I might be interested in checking out for a Let's Play. And we'll basically pick up in the next episode, I guess, where we basically continue the Let's Play from there. So for now, take care.